This is Ravi Zacharias. If you've been an atheist for a while, you've no doubt come across his name, one of his dozens of books, or his lectures online. He was a Christian apologist, someone who spent his entire career trying to answer the theological questions atheists often ask, hoping to convince skeptics to become Christians through logic and reason. Nothing he ever said did much for me personally, but I will say that as a brown person, many Christians have suggested I should check him out, as if hearing about God from someone who was born in India would somehow be more persuasive. It was not. That said, I honestly never paid him much attention, because he never really crossed the line from guy who wanted to convince you to accept Jesus to guy who wanted you to vote for Republicans because that's what Jesus wanted. I focus on politics a lot more than apologetics, so he was rarely on my radar. Actually, if I can go on a small tangent, I kind of begrudgingly appreciate Christian apologists like him because even though they're wrong, they're at least trying to answer these questions instead of saying we should just have faith in the Bible. Most people in general are apathetic about everything God-related, or they don't want to confront tough questions. So when you care a lot about these things, as many atheists do, it's kind of fun, if that's the right word, to see someone who's passionate about the same subject as you, even when they're on the opposite side, because they're often more than willing to engage in these discussions. They're not conversations I particularly enjoy having, but I know a lot of you relish them and you like watching debates on God's existence. Anyway, I mentioned Zacharias because he's in the news a lot right now, which is especially weird because he died in May. He's in the news because there are some serious allegations against him that are only now coming to light, and I'll get to all those in a moment. But it may be helpful to tell you about two other incidents that may lay a foundation for the current drama. We'll call them Scandals 1, 2, and 3. Scandal 1 involves his credentials. At various times in his career, he called himself Dr. Zacharias and said he holds 3 doctorate degrees. He said that he had been a visiting scholar at Cambridge University. He also said he's a senior research fellow at Oxford University. Now, those are some pretty good lines on your resume if you're trying to convince people you're smart and an authority figure on anything. Turns out, none of that stuff was true. He never earned 1 doctorate. He had a Master's of Divinity, which is nice, but it's not a doctorate. He had a few honorary doctorates from Christian schools, but when you get those, it's more like an award the school is bestowing upon you because they appreciate your contributions. You don't get to put doctor in front of your name like you earned it. That's unethical and frankly disrespectful to people who put in the time. You may recall there was a whole kerfuffle recently because some writer in the Wall Street Journal did not want to call Joe Biden's wife Dr. Jill Biden. But she earned her doctorate, so you should call her doctor. Ravi Zacharias was just a dude with a master's degree. That means his name was Mr. Zacharias. Was he a visiting scholar at Cambridge? Well, that's certainly what he implied in a couple of his books, but the truth is very different. He was a visiting scholar at a place called Ridley Hall when he was on a sabbatical one time, and that place is in the town of Cambridge, but it really has no formal affiliation with the famous school. At best, students at Ridley Hall can take some classes at Cambridge University, and they have a loose relationship that way, but that's it. The point is, no one at Cambridge would say Mr. Zacharias was a visiting scholar at Cambridge. He was lying. Was he a senior research fellow at Oxford University, as his bio said? No. Nor was he a professor there like he says in this clip.
Any one of you has been to Cambridge. Now I'm a professor at Oxford. I hope nobody quotes me, but Cambridge is prettier than Oxford.
Here's the truth. He was a senior research fellow at a private evangelical training center called Wycliffe Hall, which has an affiliation with Oxford. But again, he was obviously lying. No one at Oxford would ever say he was a professor or research fellow at Oxford. He's more like a guy who worked at Cambridge and Oxford Total Landscaping. After YouTuber Steve Bauman, an atheist, pointed these things out, and Christian media followed up, the bio on Zacharias' Ministries website changed to be more accurate, though still not totally truthful. The weirdest thing about Scandal 1 is that he didn't need to embellish his credentials. He was a good speaker. He knew his stuff as far as Christian apologists think you need to know stuff. And honestly, you don't need a PhD to talk about or refute God's existence. It doesn't hurt, but if you know what you're talking about, and will know it once you open your mouth, that's generally fine. It's not like anyone asks speakers to show their diplomas. Some of the best atheist debaters I know never studied the subject at a college, and some of the most influential preachers I've seen never went to seminary. Joel Osteen has the biggest church in America, and I will freely admit he is an effective speaker. No one at his church cares where he went to school. They trust him, not his paperwork. I'm not defending his preaching, but the point is you don't need to boost your resume when you have plenty of other accomplishments and you know how to talk. Mr. Zacharias would have been just fine without lying about it. Anyway, all of that came to light starting in 2016. That was Scandal 1. Then came Scandal 2, the Christian sex scandal. It's complicated, but the gist of it, from his side, is that a married woman supposedly sent him very scandalous photos and text messages over a few years, and Zacharias claimed he didn't want this at all. He met her at a conference, they stayed in touch, but he said this woman kept crossing virtual boundaries with him. He told her to stop. She did not. Zacharias said he never met with her alone, publicly or privately, and he never solicited those messages. Now, the couple had a very different story. That woman's husband said Zacharias groomed his wife by getting her to share her tragic life story with him because he was a famous Christian apologist, and they both respected him. And then he took advantage of her vulnerability. It involved making sure she messaged him on a private phone that was separate from his ministry, and which couldn't possibly have received unsolicited messages. The husband said Zacharias definitely requested explicit photos from his wife, and his wife began corresponding with him via a Snapchat-style app that deleted messages after a short time. At one point, the couple sent him a letter saying they wanted $5 million in exchange for keeping their correspondence secret. Zacharias responded by suing them for extortion, saying they were lying about all of this and hurting his reputation in the process. He even released a statement in which he indirectly said he always followed the Mike Pence rule, meaning he would never be alone with a woman who was not his wife. In my 45 years of marriage to Margie, I have never engaged in any inappropriate behavior of any kind. I love my wife with all my heart and have been absolutely faithful to her these more than 16,000 days of marriage, and have exercised extreme caution in my daily life and travels, as everyone who knows me is aware. I have long made it my practice not to be alone with a woman other than Margie and our daughters, not in a car, restaurant, or anywhere else. You're gonna want to remember that statement for Scandal 3. Now, here's where things take an unusual twist in Scandal 2. Zacharias later dropped the lawsuit. He said both sides reached a private settlement out of court, but the details of that settlement were confidential. We have no idea how much money, or any money, exchanged hands. Also, part of their deal was that neither side could talk about the story anymore. Case closed. Let's move on. So any reporters who wanted to dig into the details kind of had their hands tied. Scandal 2 happened in 2017. And now we can get to Scandal 3, the most damning one about Mr. Zacharias. And once again, we have atheist YouTuber Steve Bauman to thank for really opening the floodgates on this. Now, you should know that this past May, during the pandemic, Zacharias died of cancer. Vice President Mike Pence even spoke at his funeral and said this.
In Ravi Zacharias, God gave us the greatest Christian apologist of this century.
That sounds nice until you realize Pence also thinks Donald Trump is the greatest president ever. You would think that all the drama surrounding Zacharias would die away after his death, but then, in September, Steve Bauman, the atheist who called Zacharias out on his fake credentials years ago, posted a video with some incredible accusations. He said that Zacharias had a side hustle. He owned 2 health spas in Georgia. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. People with money often invest in other businesses. But Bauman said some former workers there were saying Zacharias had been sexually out of control with the female therapists over whom he had professional power. I will admit to you that when I first saw Steve's video, I wasn't sure how seriously to take it. I didn't think Steve was lying, but I didn't know how much weight to give to those stories because the allegations didn't match up with anything I knew about Zacharias. More importantly, Zacharias wasn't around to defend himself anymore. And finally, to protect their privacy, Steve didn't show the women on camera or name them. But you know what Steve did? He encouraged reporters to do their own research, and he would give them whatever help he could offer. And then, one did. Those women later spoke with Daniel Silliman at Christianity Today, an evangelical publication, and they told him that Zacharias had, quote, touched them inappropriately, exposed himself, and masturbated during regular treatments over a period of about 5 years, unquote. He touched himself in front of one of the women more than 50 times, she said. She also said he propositioned her more than once. He asked her for explicit photos. One woman said he made inappropriate noises when he was pleasuring himself. Christianity Today said they verified the women's identities and their job histories, even if they weren't naming the women publicly. Christianity Today also spoke to some of their co-workers to corroborate the stories. Those women only came forward anonymously because they heard about Scandal 2 with Zacharias and the married woman, and they knew she was telling the truth because her story sounded remarkably similar to what they had gone through. So, why am I telling you all this now? Like I said, Mr. Zacharias is no longer around to defend himself, and you would think there's not much that can be done, even if all this is true. Is there a point? Well, part of it is that the Ravi Zacharias International Ministries is still around and still promoting Christian apologetics and still making money, and the organization has always downplayed or denied the scandals. They rationalized the lies in his biography during Scandal 1, saying things like, in India, if you get an honorary degree, it's totally normal for people to call you a doctor. They stood by his side when he denied any wrongdoing with that married woman in Scandal 2, adding that his denial is consistent with the character of the man we knew and worked alongside for years. When they heard about the women at the spa, they said the allegations were false. But they promised they would investigate the matter. Now, you never know how seriously to take those ministry investigations. It sounds like the Catholic Church saying, we'll absolutely look into our own bad behavior. Don't worry about it. They had every reason to hire someone who won't make the cash cow look bad. And surprise, surprise, they hired a law firm that is not recognized for having expertise investigating sexual abuse. So that's shady. It doesn't mean they won't do a good job, but if the goal was getting to the truth, they probably would have hired different people. We don't know how independent or how thorough this investigation really is. But this week, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries released a message that I was not expecting. It was an update on the investigation. The law firm said they had been working with private investigators to get to the bottom of Scandal 3, and while the investigation wasn't complete yet, they could offer a few updates. The ministry shared that preliminary report with everybody, and when you see what's in the letter, holy cow. Here is a part of the law firm's preliminary report. We have found significant, credible evidence that Mr. Zacharias engaged in sexual misconduct over the course of many years. Some of that misconduct is consistent with and corroborative of that which is reported in the news recently. And some of the conduct we have uncovered is more serious. Our investigation is ongoing, and we continue to pursue leads. So not only do the allegations appear to be accurate, they may even be worse. The ministry, which is run by Mr. Zacharias' eldest daughter, basically said, look, we know this doesn't look good. This misconduct is deeply troubling and wholly inconsistent with the man Ravi Zacharias presented both publicly and privately to so many over more than 4 decades of public ministry. We are heartbroken at learning this, but feel it necessary to be transparent and to inform our staff, donors, and supporters at this time, even while the investigation continues. Not a bad statement. It's open. It seems honest. They didn't have to publish it, but they did. How much more are we going to learn about this guy months after he died? Now, I should say, according to reporter Julie Roys, who's also a conservative Christian, multiple board members of that ministry have recently quit, with one referencing how he had, quote, been badly misled by our secretive board and senior leaders, unquote. He was referring to how they kept covering up for Zacharias' alleged bad behavior despite all the evidence contradicting that. Another person who once worked closely with the ministry called out the lack of transparency in the organization and their refusal to hire a law firm with a better track record on sexual abuse to do the investigation, and for initially denying the allegations when they were made, and for not letting the board of directors know what the plan is if Zacharias gets a guilty verdict from the investigators. He also said it's clear that Ravi's reputation cannot be salvaged at this point. I don't know all the drama going on behind the scenes, or whether that drama had anything to do with why the ministry released the law firm's preliminary report publicly. But I'm still glad they did it. When it comes down to it, maybe the bigger story here is how a famous Christian apologist was able to get away with utter hypocrisy and abuse for who knows how long. He told people to follow a specific conservative interpretation of God's word while refusing to follow it himself. It's possible that his actions were far worse than those of the non-Christians he thought needed to be saved. If the final investigation confirms everything we know so far, and then some, Ravi Zacharias International Ministries should shut down, donate their multi-million-dollar budget to a cause that helps victims of sexual abuse, and issue a formal apology for all the damage caused by their namesake and the lies they perpetuated because they refused to face the facts. They owe Steve Bauman a thank you as well. And that means members of Zacharias' own family will have to come to terms with his now shattered legacy. Whatever they do, here's what I do not want to hear. They should not pretend that his message was relevant even if his conduct was indefensible, as if the two could be separated. No, His words and actions were intertwined. They always are with religious leaders who have a nasty habit of saying one thing and doing another, even as they speak out against supposed immorality. It turns out even Zacharias didn't believe the nonsense he was spewing. No one else should believe it either. Remember this: Christianity isn't a virtue. It never was. It appears that Zacharias may have gotten away with abuse, physical and emotional, for a long time precisely because he was known as a man of faith and because he was shielded by the people running his ministry, including his own family members. By the way, as I make this video, the ministry still hasn't released the married couple in Scandal 2 from their non-disclosure agreement. If the ministry really wants to hear the truth, they should allow the couple to tell their story in full, not hide behind some legal document that was clearly written to protect the reputation of someone who apparently had a lot to hide. Mr. Zacharias spent his life trying to spread what he claimed was the truth of the gospel message, implying that accepting Jesus would make you a better, more honest person. His legacy will now be reminding the world of how a prominent Christian used religion to cover up his own immoral and possibly abusive actions, and how his own family and ministry kept defending him until they no longer could, because people more committed to honesty and transparency, including atheists, pressured them into telling and admitting the truth.